Evolutionary.org Hardcore episode 226 is coming your way. Today we're talking about the best bulking stack of 2026 by Para Pharma. So this is going to be a really, really good one that we're going to go over. So let's go. Let's talk about this, and we're going to talk about different things in this one. We're going to go over why people want to bulk these
Yep.
days because everybody wants to cut, 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 cut. If you go on
Mhm.
Instagram or any of these places, everybody's all about cutting, cutting, cutting. So we're going to talk about why people want to bulk, why people would want to bulk these days.
Yep.
Monster has a lot of thoughts on that. We're going to talk about the best stacks throughout history. This is going to be a really unique one. We're going to talk about the best stacks. Best stack in 1976 during the golden age. Best stack in 1996 during the start of the internet age and when
Yep.
people started networking this stuff on the internet. And we're going to talk about the
Mhm.
best stack in 2026, which is today when we're recording this podcast. And we're going to talk about also why Para Pharma is so good and why for your next bulking stack, you can head over and check out Para Pharma and get products from them. But first, let me remind everyone we are on Apple, we are on Spotify. Make sure you smash the like button. Make sure that you are liking as much as you can and subbing, telling your friends and family all this stuff. That helps the algorithms pick us up and helps grow our channel. Who else talks about the stuff we talk about? Nobody out there. They don't have the balls to talk about what we talk about. So if you want to see this podcast continue, remember this is a community podcast. It doesn't belong to me, it doesn't belong to Mobster, it doesn't belong to anybody. It belongs to all of us. So this is a community podcast, and you are part of it as well just by listening to it. So make sure you are definitely helping us out when it comes to that so we can continue to grow. So let's start with why people want to bulk these days. And as I said, Mobster, I'm going to bring you in really quick on this one.
Yeah.
Seems like everybody these days, and it has a
Mhm.
lot to do with our accessibility to food. We can eat
Yes.
what we want when we want. And I know in North America, most of our food is shit. It's processed, it's ultra processed. I went yesterday to Walmart and even the water at Walmart is low quality. Like you can go, I've seen people filling their carts up with garbage food, and everybody's fat, everybody's obese in America. Like people who come from other countries, that's like the first thing they notice when they come to America. They're like, why is everyone so fat? And that's because of the food we're putting in their body. So obviously, when it comes to something like this, everyone wants to cut. They want to use steroids to cut, cut, cut. But if you're in great shape and you eat good, you get lean, you're able to set a goal to bulk up. And if you're
Yeah.
in a situation where you want to get big, you want to get strong, you want to be able to bulk up. So there is a niche out there, and many of you out there may not see that right now, but maybe later on you'll say, you know what, I want to bulk. Or maybe right now you're like, man, I'm skinny, I want to get bulk. So talk about that, Mobster.
Yeah. I mean, look, Steve and I have touched upon on multiple shows this modern epidemic of obesity. So I'm going to just very briefly talk about the history again. I said on a recent show that we did on a similar subject, I said you can look at a picture, for example, from 1976 and see hardly anybody obese. So when we talk about new school, old school, and a history of bulking or wherever else, there are different arguments to be made. Okay. So look, realistically, I think, and again, the person that's going to be listening to this show is probably going to fall into that category. Steve and I have described ourselves as ecto or ectomeso, meaning skinny, skinny muscular. And that was kind of our background. And then over time, we added muscle to our frame. Back in the 70s, for sure, Steve, there wasn't many fat people. And I would argue that the great and vast majority of non-champion type bodybuilders were probably, even if it was only dysmorphia and they saw themselves as skinny, that's kind of their background. So the idea that you would bulk up and follow the protocols of that time and the training and the diet of that time makes a lot of sense. There's still going to be a percentage of our audience who don't struggle with obesity. But let me just touch on that as well. I've argued with Steve somewhat, and he's actually been quite good in coming back to me with actual proof of the quality of food that's available in the US, say, for example, versus the UK or other countries in terms of our laws and our regulations for food. And I agree with Steve. But one of the issues, Steve, is the availability. We've got more available educational information, more access to information, including these shows, than people have ever had at any point in history. They can literally look up the university documents, they can read the studies, they can read on nutrition, they can watch videos, they can listen to shows like this. And yet obesity is worse now than it's ever been. And some of it is just pure laziness. And I'm talking about the general population, not listeners of this show, because we can order in, and we can order in a way now that's even easier than it used to be. We don't even have to ring up and talk to a person at a restaurant, Steve. We can just touch an app and order food. I think our Tesco's, which is similar to Walmart, although Asda's actually some part of the same company, they now do like a thing where they would deliver shopping to you within 15 minutes. And most people that order that food or use Uber or ordering, they're not ordering in a lean protein meal. So yeah, the issue now is just crazy. And it's accessibility as well as quality. And it's not information. It's not access of information to nutrition, whatever else. It's just laziness. So yeah, and we need to be more mobile and whatever else. But again, percentage of our listeners will be skinny or skinny fat, light framed, ectomorphic, etc. So those people, and even those, as Steve said already, that have already got into some kind of shape, have a little bit of leeway to add a little bit of soft tissue and therefore muscle. Why do they want to bulk? I'll deal with the skinny guys first, the ectomorphs first. Quite simply, because of their ectomorphic frames and because of their arguably slightly faster metabolisms and their activity levels, it can be a struggle to put on weight. And specifically, when we say weight, we really mean muscle with a small percentage of fat. And your ectomorphic frame and slightly higher metabolism has a bit of leeway. And I would argue again that all things being equal, a little bit of soft tissue, and I mean a small percentage of fat and a little bit of water, arguably make it easier if that exists on the body and in the diet. It spares the nitrogen, it spares the protein for more muscle building. So they're allowed, because they're walking around with a six pack all the time, maybe almost too much at the time. And they will certainly make sense for them to bulk and use the PEDs and the diets and the training that we talk about during these shows to add a little bit of soft tissue, but hopefully the majority of their bulk will be fat. If they're lean, because they've worked at getting lean, they've done a cut, they've got into shape, they're holding on to that muscle tissue, their body fat percentage is reasonably low, you will want to add muscle, most people, unless you've sort of suddenly achieved your ideal physique, Steve, you're going to want to add muscle at some point during the year. We've discussed when is probably better, I would argue, for typically winter or what we might call the off season for bodybuilders, regardless of where you live in the world. And again, that's because they're a little bit softer, they're not stage ready, they're not beach ready. And these people might want, they want to put a quarter of an inch here and half an inch there. And arguably, we could call that lean bulking. So yeah, there's also, and we've touched on this in a recent show again, where we talked about the psychology. So not only do you need to understand why you want to get bigger and what that might mean in terms of bulking, we discussed also how it feels. And we kind of expanded on that and said, literally, guys, if you add an inch to your arms and an inch to your shoulders and an inch to your chest, and you keep your waist within a reasonable size, and then you fill out your trousers more with your quads. And, you know, I had some brand spanking new I'd never worn it before, although I'd owned them for a while. Tracksuit bottoms, training jogger pads, whatever you want to call it, last week, Steve. And while they were okay for length and fitting on my arse and around my waist, they were tight on my calves. And I was thinking, have my calves got bigger, or is it just a fucking fit? So when you bulk, that's kind of where you go. You kind of start to feel out your shirt more, and you walk around with a bigger chest, and your arm feels like your what do they call it now? Pump covers. I got it's a 4XL. I'm wearing it right now, a 4XL hoodie. And when my daughter gave it to me last Christmas, it was tight on my forearms. And you go, what the fuck? And that's what being bulked up can feel like. You're typically stronger, if only for the leverage. You're not, because especially in the winter months, you're more likely to be covered up. So you're not going to freak over veins or striations or separation, being cut, being lean, being ripped all the time. And there is a certain, I would argue sometimes, a little bit of pleasure not having to be super fucking fastidious on your diet and just walking around to coin a phrase that's been used before, as big as a fucking house, full and full as fuck. It's not stage ready by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of okay, comfortable, whatever else. And what you want in the back of your mind is that when the spring, the summer, the cutting months, competition comes round, you haven't put on too much fat as they used to do perhaps back in the day, and underneath will be new, hard muscle. A quarter of an inch here, an insertion there, a better shaped pec, or more of a peak on your arm, but some added tissue, good tissue, lean tissue when you come off the bowl. And like I said, no one, here's a problem, probably another reason as well. No one should be super lean all the time, and no one should be super fat or super bulked all the time. Neither of those extremes is healthy. So a little bit of easing off of the gas. I don't train balls out in my training, or does Steve year round. That's impossible. The fastest man on earth doesn't run that fast every single fucking day. The strongest men on earth, the most muscular men on earth, women too, they cannot be that shape, that form, that speed, that whatever, all the fucking time. The human body doesn't work like that. It's quite cyclical. So easing off the gas and allowing your body to get a bit bigger or a little bit softer is nature. You can still be healthy. You can still be relatively lean. But again, if you are looking to add muscle tissue, if you want, for example, you compete to improve your biceps and you want a better peak, a little bit of bulk, a little bit of soft tissue is ideal. And there are certain things that we can do, which we're going to touch upon in terms of protocols and dosing and so on and so forth, that are more applicable to someone bulking than they are to someone cutting. It's a bit of a grey area. We can have a back and forth on what works, and we will do. And specifically today, which Steve said earlier on, you won't see this said on other shows just because they lack the historical knowledge. We're going to try and give you an idea of why and how they did it in the 70s, why and how they did it in the 90s, and especially as per the topic of today, how we do it now. And especially, again, this from Steve and I's opinion. So, yeah, let's talk about a little bit very quickly, guys. This is more the history before we talk about the stacks. Lean bulking versus old school bulking. And
Yeah.
we said this on another show. So, yeah, talk a little bit about that, Steve.
Well, let me just add, a little to what you said. And a lot of times, anabolic steroids, the para pharma steroids that we're going to talk about, if you're a skinny guy, if you're ectomorph, as you were talking about earlier, the benefit of using these bulking steroids would be it's going to increase your appetite. And some people just don't have appetite. That's just how it is. And, it's easy for them to stay skinny because they don't eat very much. Now, when you use anabolic steroids, some of these steroids that we're going to talk about, the dianabols and testosterones and the decas, these bulking steroids are going to increase your appetite big time. And your body is going to be begging you for more food. So you're going to be increasing the amount of carbs, fats, and proteins that you're putting in your body and calories overall. And it's going to help you obviously get bigger when you do that. So this is where parapharma steroids come into play. And they're going to also help you, as you talked about, they're going to help retain more muscle mass. They're going to break down barriers to help you gain more muscle mass in the process. So we've seen guys go from skinny to bulking up 10, 20 pounds on a single steroid cycle, especially if they have room to grow. And also what Mobster talked about being as big as a house. How many times do we see videos online when you're on the social media or something? There's literally videos and people that post nothing but people getting into disputes and fighting and arguing in public and all
Yeah.
this stuff. If you're a big motherfucker, if you're a mobster size and you really think anyone's gonna fuck with you, they're just not. So a lot of that is being secure. It's the same concept of why people feel the need to carry weapons with them. And it's
Yeah.
sad that in our society, we have to basically be paranoid all the time where we feel
Mm.
like we have to be big to protect ourselves or we have to have a weapon to protect ourselves. In reality, again, it's social media and stuff like that. When you have, in America, you've got what, 330, 340, 350 million people. You're going to have
Yeah.
these types of incidences happen every day, because there's so many fucking people. But in reality, as long as do everything the right way and you don't put yourself into situations like that, the chances of that happening are very, very slim in your lifetime that anyone's just going to walk up to you in public and want to fight you. So, luckily, it's one of those things where hopefully it doesn't happen to anybody. I did have a buddy of mine actually a few years ago get jumped. He was walking at night down the road, and three guys literally jumped him and they ripped off all his jewelry and beat him up. So stuff like that does happen. I mean, unfortunately. So a lot of people in his situation, for example, Mobster, in his situation, he would feel more secure by
Yeah.
adding 20 pounds to his frame. Maybe those guys would think twice about jumping him if they knew, this guy's a big motherfucker. He wasn't. The guy was like 125 pounds, 130 pounds, really skinny. So they figured, yeah, we can take this guy really easy, steal all his shit, and run, and he's not going to be able to do anything about it. So, and if you want to feel more secure about yourself and you've been skinny all your life and you've been weak all your life, this is a great reason why in 2026 you can make yourself big and strong, and it can help you defend yourself and defend your loved ones in that retrospect.
I use the phrase with you on another show, Steve, and we talk about nature all the time on these shows. And I said it's human nature. And the example I give is this. I said it comes from our caveman days, maybe even from when we were swinging around in the fucking trees, pre-human history. I said it's just nature. Okay, little guys. Again, as big as I am, I'm not invincible. Doesn't make me a great fighter or whatever else. But to be fair, I don't need to be a great fighter. I've only got to hit you once, and I'm hitting you with over 300 pounds. So I just got to get lucky. I don't have to be good. But the nature part is quite simple. I imagine that we're walking through the fucking jungle, and I use the alleyway as an example in modern society, Steve. And I said, you don't know me as a person. You might not realize this mobster coming toward you with a grin on his face because it's dark. And Steve's coming in one direction and I'm coming in the other direction. And I'm backlit. All that Steve gets to see is 6 foot plus, 300 fucking pounds. Is this geezer going to try to give me fucking shit? Is he going to fucking put his hands on me? Do I have to be careful? Do I have to put my head down? Do I avoid eye contact? That's just fucking nature. It just is. It doesn't mean I might be smiling. I might be putting my hand out to shake his hand. I might be ready for a fist bump. I might be just about to acknowledge his existence and say, hi, Steve, how you doing? But he can't see that. All he sees is this big backlit, beanie wearing, broad shouldered motherfucker. And he thinks, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll just slow down and keep an eye on what's going on. That's normal, natural human behavior. We haven't grown out of it yet. Their brain's kind of there, but the rest of us, the lizard brain, the adrenaline, the flight or flight stuff just doesn't. And it's comfortable. And ironically, it's weird, as Steve knows and as I know, we get big and muscular and become more comfortable. And that's not just confident, but we're kind of capable. We know that we're strong. We know that we're big. And it just becomes less and less of a thing, which is kind of nice, I suppose. And again, I'm older, so I kind of give less of a shit than perhaps I did when I was in my teens. But I know what it was like. Steve knows what it's like. We know what it was like being skinny or skinny fat or whatever. And our background is kind of ectomorphic, like I said, maybe a little bit mesomorphic with a bit of muscle and genetic response. But that's where we were. So we absolutely understand the necessity or the feel of the necessity of wanting to get big and wanting to get strong. But I still am, for fuck's sake. Steve's moved away from that a little bit. I still kind of am because that's just a vibe. But I'm doing, I enjoy it and whatever. But I've been a teenager when I started this stuff. I've done it in my early 20s and 30s. I get it. So I kind of see where that goes and whatever else.
Yeah. If you're working around a lot of men, you
Yeah,
feel the need to be more intimidating because there is
a little bit.
bullying
I've
that
been in those
happens.
environments. I've worked
Yeah.
in a factory, Steve, and
Yeah.
the guys used to give me shit and I'd give them shit back or whatever else. And
Yeah.
at some point, you
Yeah.
get big
You
and
rub
fucking
each other
strong
the wrong way, you get annoyed
and
with
there's
each
less shit.
other. Do you want someone fucking with you? Do you want someone intimidating you? People get
I've had,
jealous, you get
I've had fight. I've
promoted.
literally had fights at work. I got told off for overdoing it
Yeah.
because someone was pushing it like a knife. I can
So are they
overreacted.
more likely to fuck with you if you put on 20 or 30 pounds of muscle?
Yeah, no, no.
Unless they're stupid. Yeah. So, but
Steve,
at least
you've had
you
the
can
same.
defend
You've had the
yourself.
same as me, Steve. I've been out back in the day when it was more of a thing than it is now, when I was going out clubbing or pubbing or whatever back in the day. And one of the things you get at the beginning of the evening when most people haven't had enough to drink yet was, how you doing, big man? You're out there, big man. What do you bench? Silly stuff like that. But in a way, it's, okay, that's how they perceive you. They don't know you yet. They haven't had a chance to get to know you. So that's what they think. That's what they see. The drug and alcohol can lower those inhibitions, but for the most part, that's the innate fucking nature. There's this big fucker. I'm going to be his buddy. There's this big fucker. I might need him later on. I'm going to get him your ass handed to me. There's this big fucker. We should be friends because I'd rather have him as a friend than an enemy. And again, that's just normal shit. That's just the reality. Like Steve said, just to very quickly finish on that point, it sells on the algorithms being a skinny, lean, quote unquote, attractive to women kind of vibe for influencers. So they spend most of the year as in shape as they possibly can, or at least covered up when they're not super in shape, and selling you guys the idea of being in shape and so on and so forth. But again, here's the classic one, just to finish on this thought, Steve. You get occasionally, women do the same thing. They'll say, oh, I don't want to get too big or too muscular. For the most part, you fucking won't. You won't because you don't want to, but you won't because you can't. Your genetics are going to have a limitation. Most people don't train it hard. They're not prepared to push the envelope food-wise, training-wise, and certainly PED-wise. And you're not, unfortunately, got those, oh, no, I've got Superman genetics. I'm going to turn into a freak. No, you ain't. The percentage of people that look like Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler, whoever, is fucking tiny. It's fractional. So women don't need to worry about being muscular. And guys that like being lean and sexy or whatever the fuck all the time, it's really not a problem. It's not going to happen. It's not as easy as people think. And again, this is why we have PEDs, this is why we have these protocols, and that's why people did what they used to do to add muscle. Competitively speaking, and I'll use the 1976 reference, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, whatever else, Arnold described it as sculpting the physique. He knew that he needed to be slightly broader across the shoulder. He knew that he needed to bring his waist down. So bulking for people like Arnold in 76 would have been a case of get a little bit soft, add a little bit of muscle, and then sculpt that fucking fat off, bring the waist down, look better on stage than you did last year. And that's just from the competition. But we apply those thought processes to us, the listener, to us, the average Joe, as a template, a way of thinking and a way of working to get that kind of stuff to work for us, so that even if we don't have Arnold or whoever's genetics, we can at least look at him, his compatriots, the people around him, and kind of sort of model ourselves on them, with it's the food, the gym, the lifestyle, the whole bodybuilding vibe, bulking, cutting, whatever. This is how we work. We look at the top end. We also look at what works for you, the listeners.
So let's talk about the best stack as we progress. We're going to talk about the best stack in 1976, then 1996, then 2026, which is today when we're doing this podcast. So 1976, this was the golden age when Arnold was peaking in his bodybuilding journey. He was winning his Mr. Olympias, competing against guys like Frank Zane and other guys in that era. And Monster, get into how guys in this era were buying steroids. How would they get a hold of steroids in this time? This was well before the internet. No one even knew what internet was at this time. This was way before, you could, Google how to find steroids. Like, so talk about that a little bit and how things were in 1976 when it came to the bulking type of thing.
Yeah. Some part of this is similar to 96, but I'll specifically reference an interview. Arnold did an interview way back in the day with Barbara Walters, and Barbara Walters was at that time, she's passed away since, Steve, was the person to do a chat show with, up there with Johnny Carson. And she was kind of more serious. Johnny would have entertainers on. Barbara was doing serious shit. And whoever that Arnold was working with at that time managed to get him on the Barbara Walters show. So he comes onto this show, and she's thinking he's a big fucking bodybuilder. He's got no brain. A lot of the guys would get nervous in front of the camera and they would say stupid shit. And people wasn't used to social media as they are now and ready with a quote or something to say or goof about. So Arnold was, as he still is, a clever motherfucker. And one of the first questions Barbara said to him was, excuse me, and very careful pronouncing his name, excuse me, Mr. Schwarzenegger, or excuse me, Arnold, Call me Arnold. Thank you very much. Do you use steroids? And Arnold is meant to be, oh, no, no, I'm natural. This is just, hard work every day, eat my eggs for breakfast. No, and Arnold turned around and said, yes, quite clearly, quite plainly, very confidently, sitting back in his chair, very relaxed. Would you like to tell me about it? So Arnold's told this story. And this has been true then as it is true now, Steve. There have always been medical people, specifically doctors, who are, like all other aspects of society, athletes of all kinds, they're going to have fans from every strata, high, the low, the rich, the poor of society, from the guys that are digging the roads up to top surgeons. That's just the nature of the business. If you've got a million followers, some of those followers are rich and clever and university educated. So what happened back in the day was, and Arnold tells this variations of this story, was, and I've told it as well, it was thus. So all the guys are training out in the 70s out of Gold's Gym, Venice Beach, California, not the one that we know today, but the smaller one owned by Joe Gold. Within I think Pacific Avenue seems to ring a bell, within 5 or 10 minutes of the beach walk. And it's only about 4,000 square foot, I think, Steve. There are pictures there, they're classic photographs. And they're all training at the same time together. The Pumping Iron movie is set in that gym at around that time, 75. But we're talking about 76. So Arnold tells a version of the story which was along the lines of, so there were doctors we could go to, and I think he said this to Barbara Waters. They would give us the steroids. They'd write a strict prescription out for the steroids. It was that easy. So I could do it with medical supervision, some medical guidance, and so on and so forth. So Steve and I can't go to our local doctor, even if we're really lucky and get TRT. We can't go to our local doctor and say, hey, doc, write me out a script for Sustanon. And it's 2026 as we do this fucking show, Steve. But back in the day, before it was an issue, there were some understanding doctors that would help you. The better ones, and I think the one in California that Arnold and the team were working with, also kept an eye on their health. You have to remember, of course, guys, that the dosages were low as fuck. Rumors don't have them using crazy amounts of Debo, and there certainly wasn't, with one or two exceptions, and that was more towards the 90s, using grams and grams of testosterone. And something that Steve's been very clear on is the limitation. What was available then, what was available in the 90s, and what's available now, it's just a fucking fraction, Steve. We know that forms of testosterone were available, but that was kind of it. I don't think anybody was using in 1976 Masteron, Provaron. Growth hormone was incredibly rare if they were lucky. It never really became a thing. Tren was essentially non-existent as far as bodybuilders were concerned. Stimulants probably limited to literally the stimulants that the people on the street were using, which was still limited in terms of what was available. So fat-burning products. Steve being very clear when he said AIs were practically non-existent. I wouldn't even say Novodex was available in 76, Steve. Never
Now, by
mind.
AI, by the way, we're talking about anti-estrogens,
Yeah,
aromatizing
the
inhibitors,
aromatase
not
inhibitors.
AI
Yeah.
as in what people think AI
No,
is.
no, no. Computers. No, you're right, Steve. So
Right.
look, literally, and I think we kept it kind of simple. There was two or three orals at best, and two or three forms of testosterone. Growth hormone was just starting to be a thing, and I mean just one or two very like Steve
Yeah.
Michalak or Michalak being informed,
You'd
and
have to
even he was
be,
more
yeah, and they
late
kept that
70s,
shit
early
secret,
80s.
and it's not like today
Insulin,
they keep shit
insulin was
secret.
not really used at all. If I think one person whose name I can't remember right now.
Yeah.
He ended up winning the Mr. America because he was a type 1 diabetic.
Things were
Tim
so
Belknap. Tim
slow
Belknap was the
in
person
those
I'm thinking of.
days.
Yeah. And
Knowledge
what about the
spread
information,
so
Steve? What about the
slow.
information? It was all gossip. You would have to go with Arnold and the boys, as anybody who trained in those days, to the cafe for a beer, for
Yeah.
a coffee,
It's
for
like
breakfast,
discussing
and
your
then
bowel movements today with your buddies. It
yeah,
just people just didn't do it.
yeah,
It's not like today where information is so readily. You could post any, like you on a social media sub forum and post a question about steroids, and you'd have like the next day 200 answers, and
yeah,
maybe 95% of those answers are crap, and only 5% are good. That's the problem. It's like we have too much information today. So you have to kind of filter out the information. So in that time, it was very different. Like if you wanted information in those days, Mobster, you had to basically go to the library and check out books.
Oh
Even
yeah,
going into the 90s,
even
that's how I,
even that,
yeah,
even that, Steve, because university libraries wasn't as successful. The information there was zero books on
yeah,
anabolics in '76. There was
yeah,
not. Bob Goldman was probably the only person that vaguely understood, and even that
yeah.
more of an '80s. There was
Completely
there
different
was.
time. Yeah.
What about the other thing you and I have touched upon? And we're gonna.
Access to steroids is also
Yeah,
another important thing. And back then
yeah. Sorry. So
they only had access to a handful of steroids. It's not like today where you
yes.
can go on
Oh
evolution.org, click
please,
on
yeah.
one of our sources, click on Para Pharma, find Para Pharma, and Para Pharma has literally a whole list of
45,
fucking options.
47, 48 products. Yeah,
And
they had maybe five, Steve, and we're looking
yeah.
at 40 and 50 on
So let's
Parapharma
talk
alone.
about two, and then I'll let you kind of give your thoughts. Let me talk about the top two steroids that they had for bulking.
Yes,
And
yes.
that, and in my opinion, look, and based on what we know from guys who have talked about it and what they had access to, the two bulking ones would have been Deca and Dynable. So they would not use testosterone very often in those days. They had no way to combat estrogen. There was no AIs. There was no anti-estrogen options that they knew of, at least. So they would not be, and they would not use Primobolan, which was available in those times for bulking because it was not a bulker. So someone like you know these guys, these bodybuilders would use the Primo going into a show, but when they were bulking in 1976, if they wanted to bulk in the off season, or if they just were a gym rat who wanted to bulk, that's not going to be an option for you. Obviously, Primobolan, it's not going to help you bulk very well. So and you know, this is a good stack that they would have done. They would use the Parapharma Deca, 400 milligrams a week, and Parapharma Dynable, 20 milligrams a day. And that would they'd be able to generally control their estrogen. If you were very estrogen prone, this cycle could give you issues. But if you were unlucky enough, but guys who were not so estrogen prone, they could take more Dianabol than just 20 milligrams. They could take a handful of Dianabol. If each pill is 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams, they could end up taking 40, 50, 60 milligrams. As long as they weren't estrogen prone, they'd be able to pull it off. Now, the advantage of the DECA would be DECA aromatizes a fifth as much as testosterone. So, again, they had no way to combat estrogen in those days. A lot of you are going to say, oh, Steve, they're not running testosterone. How could you not run testosterone? Well, because they didn't run testosterone, guys, and they couldn't run testosterone in those days. It was unheard of for them to use testosterone for that reason. They had no way to combat the estrogen. So Dynable, at least, you can control estrogen with Dynable because it's in and out of your system quick. So if you run into estrogen issues, you start getting itchy nipples, you start getting a lot of water retention, all you have to do is just stop taking the Dynable. It'd be out of your system in a few days or maybe a week. It'd be completely out of your system after a week, week and a half at the most. It's got a 3 or 4 hour half life. So the half life of Dynable is less than 24 hours. I mean, the active life of Dynable is less than 24 hours. So technically, even if you're running a high amount, it should, after you stop taking it, it should be out of your system completely in a few days and no longer causing that aromatization. So that would have been a stack that they would go for Mobster. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on other things that they would have had
No,
access
I
to?
agree. I agree completely, Steve. And I think the only thing that we would see from those times, we would probably describe their bulk in those days as more of a dirty bulk because the guys would sometimes put on anywhere between 20 to 40 pounds in the off season bulking. And the problem was again, and part of that might be down to the water issue that Steve's talked about with estrogen, but probably also not as being fastidious with the diet, etc., and allowing themselves to get it big. And the issue then becomes, of course, not all of that is muscle, and they've got that much more work to do to cut down. And they're way more strict in some ways than we are with the modern bodybuilding diet because they would get things right the way back and then arguably losing some muscle tissue. This is probably around the same time as what we call the bodybuilding science, the warfare, so to speak, just started to creep in. So the tricks were minimal, and when we got more tricks and more techniques and more understanding, more access towards the late 70s, early 80s to the university, to the information, and so on and so forth. And very early 80s, maybe, was when you might started to see more of which we'll get into, especially when we're talking about the 90s, the late 80s and 90s, more where people were starting to get products in the trunk of their dealer's car. Someone would turn up at the gym with a bag or come out to the car lot, open up the trunk of their car. There'd be a bag in the back of the car, and then they would have products that had been smuggled in from another country or over the border or whatever else. And then, even then, it was still what he had. Not going to Para Pharma and seeing 40 or 50 products. What I've got, what do you want? Not really, it's not like going to Walmart and having a choice of 47 different televisions or, 15 kinds of sausages or 5 kinds of fucking cuts of beef or whatever. It was, you've got one cut of beef and one TV and one. That's what it was like. I've only got Debo, they're only 10 milligrams. He didn't have Anavar, he didn't have Winstrol oral or injectable. He might have some testosterone, but it's Mexican testosterone. I've also got some French stuff. Do you want? That was the way that it was. And again, information was still word of mouth. It
Yeah.
was maybe
So the
pamphlets if
internet
you
in
love.
America started coming in the 90s, right? I believe the early 90s, but very, very few people had
In
access
terms
to
of
it.
in terms of public accessibility or broad public
Yeah.
accessibility,
So
yes, yeah, yes,
so I can remember, I'm gonna tell you guys a story. You can tell your story, Mobster, but I can remember I'd go to the library. Okay. And
mm,
I was around 14 years old. I'd ride my bicycle down to the library.
yep,
And if you went to the second floor, you could go in there, sign in. You'd have to sign in and show an ID, and they'd
yeah,
let you into a room, and you could
yeah,
go in that room and use the internet. Now, it was super slow internet, but I could go on there and I could look up stuff with sports. I used to look up stuff in finance. I was into stocks at the time, and I was into sports. And it was really cool to read these articles about my sports team and all this stuff because instead of waiting for this sports show to come on Sunday morning, I could just go on the internet and access articles and things on sports. So it was really, really cool. So if you were interested in steroids, learning about steroids and stuff, that's what you
mm,
would do.
yeah,
But the thing is, there weren't forums yet, bodybuilding forums yet that were around. Now, Elite Fitness, I went on Elite Fitness just now, and I
yeah.
went to the oldest post on Elite Fitness, and it was in 2000. So even sites like Elite Fitness, they didn't even start coming around. I don't know if they started in the late 90s and maybe the forum only goes back to 2000.
I think bulletin boards was around and message boards were around, but
Yeah.
you didn't have what we would call a forum. No.
Yeah. So the information wasn't there for you to
Oh,
access. So
please.
how did people know what to use? I think it was just a lot of gym talk and bro science
Yes.
and stuff. And as you
Yes.
said, Mobster, what was available? So I'm going to give you, you can talk more about that. Let me give you an idea of a great bulking stack at that time that
Yeah.
guys would have had access to. And then you can kind of touch more about it, Mobster. So I'd go with Para Pharma Tren E, 350 milligrams a week. Now, obviously, at that time, Tren, they would have called it something different. Maybe they call it Phenoplix, or maybe they call
Bowling
it
or whatever. Yeah.
Parabolin. So it just
Yeah.
depends. And then Parapharma Test E 300 milligrams a week because you could use testosterone at that time. Anavar or Anadrol at 25 milligrams a day from Parapharma. And then you could also, at that time, what they like to use at that time was Nolvadex on cycle. It's not an optimal thing to use, but it did somewhat of a good job at helping with your estrogen issues. So that would have been a good cycle. Also, DECA would have been, maybe you can go over a good DECA cycle from 1996 Mobster, and you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'll do. I made some very brief notes while Steve was talking, and I said I wrote down the informed only, meaning really only a small percentage of people at that time had the proper information. I can recall because I have magazines from that time and earlier. There was a couple of guys here in the UK. This is before Mick Hart, although Mick Hart was around then, and Paul Borison. They would be late 90s, early 2000s, both of them. There was a couple of other fellas who were amongst the very first that you would go and sit down with and have a serious conversation. And they had done the work, they had done the research. But that meant that the rest of us were sitting there in the dark like mushrooms, living on shit. We knew very little, we had access to very little. This handful of people, two people I'm thinking of particularly, here in the UK and maybe 10 or 15 in America. These were the only people that had actually gone to the universities and sat in the university libraries and looked at the dissertations, looked at the essays, looked at the books, and kind of understood what was being said. Body doctors were still doing the anabolics don't build muscle. Motherfucker, the sheer name anabolic really means to build, and they couldn't get their heads around it. Athletes were just starting to come in, especially the higher end athletes and better paid athletes, were just literally having enough sense to say, I need to speak to someone who knows what the fuck's going on. And again, that was late 80s, early 90s. But for the rest of us, very, very little. It was around 96, 97, 98 with Dan Duquesne came to the fore. The team, and I've mentioned this on other shows of Muscle Media, going over the border, accessibility to PEDs, and so on and so forth. I'm also, because I started training in 1980, I didn't take steroids so much later, but I was still reading at that time and seeing some of the information came out. So I literally bought the books. In the early thousands and mid thousands, that's when I was talking to some of these people that had been doing it for a long time. And I'm also thinking, for example, here, Steve, and I wrote this down, Bill Llewellyn with his, and I've got one here, it's like 500 pages and it's got pictures of all the different brands and how to work out what labels legit and all that kind of stuff. You also started to see at that time way more guys that would go to Mexico, like the Muscle Media crew, like the Romanos and Duquesne, going over the border, going to the pharmacia and literally buying steroids legitimately in Mexico and then either taking them there or trying to work out a way to bring it back. And we had a lot more young entrepreneurial, shall we call it, would-be bodybuilders or would-be dealers that were going south of the border or starting to incorporate products from different countries. And Steve's touched on this on another show where you said you would send your money off and hope for the best. And it was coming sometimes from a company in Bulgaria, from India, in the fucking post. You wasn't having what we call domestic in the US or in the UK companies that had already done that work for you. So you just had to get it, quote unquote, locally. And you certainly had zero or a fraction, should I say, argumentatively, of the accessibility. Like I said, I'm literally looking at Para Pharma right now. And I think we're talking of 45, 46 unique different kinds of products, different sort of things, both orals,
And let me give
injectables.
you the
No, you had
old
nothing like.
school, and let me give you the old school stack. And this was a super
Sorry,
popular
Steve. I
bulk.
was thinking you did have Primo, but that's not really a bulk.
No, no. So this is the old
Trend
school.
just about, yeah.
So let me talk about the best bulking stack of 1996. This is the one I've talked to guys in the gym who are about your age, mobster, who are big power lifters. This is what they really
Yep,
love to use. Parapharma Dianabol 30 milligrams a day. Parapharma Deca 400 milligrams a week. Parapharma
yep,
Testosterone 500 milligrams a week. And then the Parapharma Novadex as needed for estrogen. And that was the old school 90s bulker, perma
yep,
bulker
yep,
stack
yep.
that made your appetite. Talk a
Still
little bit about
works.
Talk about that stack a little bit and your
Yep.
experience with it.
I've used a variation on the NAT stack many, many times. The limitation with AI, as Steve said, or estrogen control was literally limited to Novadex. One of my favorite bulker stacks, which still works as a bulker stack, I'm running something very similar to that right now, just slightly higher dosages than Steve suggested, would be Sustain Deck. And I've said this many, many times. I'm trying to think, I think it was 2006, 2007 when I did it, but I'd read about it in those 90s books. So absolutely. Um, and again, I think, that might also, you might have seen, and again, it was subject to accessibility, Steve, some of the higher dosages of testosterone starting to creep in. And again, I think what was also starting to happen at that time, so this is why you might have seen derivatives of testosterone, and just towards the end of the 90s, the trend. Um, as we've said on many shows, people either A, limiting accessibility, but B, also going with what worked for them. So I would argue that the Sus Deca, which Steve talks about, which I love, is more watery, more of a soft bulk versus, for example, running 1,000 milligrams or more, which just started to happen at that time, getting into the higher dosage of the testosterone. And even then, Steve, did they have enanthate? Did they have propionate? Did they have? Yes, these things existed, had existed for a while, but was it easy for everybody to get? Again, you were still limited to somewhat, even myself, and I'm talking about the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you were still limited to what could be got hold of. And that was talking to people in the know versus what we have accessibility to now. So, for example, someone now, and we will talk about those kind of stacks as well, absolutely will have different products at different times during their stack. Someone now absolutely should, especially if they've done a few cycles, have a good idea of what works for them and whether they want to have lean muscle tissue or they're okay being a little bit soft. For me, Sust and Deca's worked every single time. Every single time it works now for the most part. And it's just coming down to the food diet I get in terms of whether it's hard muscle tissue or softer. And obviously, because I train with less volume, whether I'm going to increase my strength as I do, or whether I'm looking to add muscle. So again, and here's another thing, Steve, and I'm just thinking in terms of accessibility again. The powerlifters, I would argue, in some way, were more experimental. They were the guys that were trying check drops. They were the guys that were trying halo testing more perhaps than the bodybuilders. What we also saw then, which we have now, of course, is that swapping backwards and forwards information. So what were athletes doing to become better athletes? What were bodybuilders doing to add
Yeah.
muscle? Where's the information coming from, and so on. So you're more likely to see, oh, that powerlifter's using halo. Should I use halo? Probably not. Maybe at the end of a training cycle for strength, but not for stage, getting stage ready. I also see, as we still do now, higher dosages of Dynabol, but again, for competition purposes only, I would actually argue Anavar's better, of course, as it is,
Yeah.
versus
And
what was available then.
And of course, you can adjust the dosages from what we're talking about.
Yes,
We'd love to
yes.
hear your comments on the best
I
bulking
run more than
cycles.
700 milligrams, Steve. I'm up around the 850. That
Okay.
seems to work. I've gone over
Yeah.
a gram and it didn't
And
do nothing for me.
yeah, and we'd love to hear what your best bulking cycles have been as well over time and in today. So let's get back in the time machine, Mobster, and move to the present 2026.
Yeah,
And look, as we've evolved to 2026, we are completely spoiled with the amount of gear we have access to. And it's thanks to brands like Para Pharma. And look, you could take the old school bulking stack and tweak it like this. And this is
yes,
this. I'm going to give you a couple different stacks, and in Mobster, you can comment or give me your stack. So the first stack that I'll do is a tweak of the old school stack. It'd be testosterone 250 milligrams a week, Deca 500 milligrams a week, Dianabol 30 milligrams a day. But now you're adding Proviron at 50 milligrams a day, and you're also adding Aromasin as needed. So that gives us Aromasin is the absolute best aromatase inhibitor of 2026. It is the best one to use. It's a suicide AI, meaning it permanently disables that estrogen enzyme from aromatizing. And that's a huge advantage that they did not have access to back in your day, Mobster. Now, another crazy good bulking stack for advanced users would look something like this. Trenbolone E, 300
yeah,
milligrams a week, Deca, 400 milligrams a week. Then you're also adding, again, the Proviron at 50 milligrams a day. Now, the Proviron not only helps the cycle work better, but it also offsets the negative side effects from the Deca, which is going to metabolize into DHN, which is dihydronandrolone. So you're adding a DHT derivative, Proviron, which does many good things in the cycle, including not help balance out that DHN and DHT in the body. And then also on this one, Aromasin as needed. You may not need as much Aromasin as you think because the DECA is only aromatizing a fifth as much as testosterone. Remember, you're not adding testosterone to this. It's not going to have testosterone. Of course, you can add it if you want, but because you're adding that Trenbolone to the DECA, you're getting a lot of androgens as it is. So you don't want to get too many androgens because then the cycle becomes too much side effects. You can't sleep at night. Your appetite will actually drop if you add too much androgens to a cycle. And if you can't sleep, you're not going to be able to recover to help your muscles grow, you see? So it becomes counterproductive. This is why in this example, we're not going to add testosterone to this. We're going to do the Tren, the Deca, the Proviron, and the Aromasin as needed, which you may not even need. So this, in my opinion, would be the most best in 2026 bulking stack for advanced users. And then the one I talked about before would be one for anybody who's even, you've done a couple cycles on your bout and now you want to bulk up. So, Monster, what are your thoughts on these cycles that I laid out? And what are your thoughts on a cycle that you like for 2026?
Well, I would agree in part with Steve, but I guess as an example, guys, and here's where the difference starts to come in. As Steve was talking, I very quickly wrote down Deccan 300, but they also have an NPP. So now you've got two different kinds of Deca you can choose from, Steve. And arguably, lean bulking might favour the NPP, and slightly softer, bigger bulking might favour the Deccan 300. We have, and I just looked here very quickly again, a Trend Bow, which is the Ace version at 100 milligrams per mil. And then they've got a Trend Mix 350. So, now, here's the thing, guys. You suddenly got choices of esters. You haven't got a single ester to choose from. You've got multiple esters to choose from. As a lot of the guys that tend to be leaner adding muscle would favor the NPP. 150 milligrams, I'd probably run that a couple of times a week, Steve. So 300, just at the low end. And again, the Deccan 300, I would probably prefer me as a lifter who wants to be a bit more bulky, the 300. And again, I've said with the Deccan and their Sustanon, I'm looking at, they have got something called Sus 350 and a Deccan 300, which would suit my purposes. I would run that 1 mil of each every 4 days. And that pushes me up to around the 800, 850, 900 milligrams a week, circa there or thereabouts, averaged out over 7 days. For those of the guys that we know that are using Sustanon 350, but tend to be leaner and just want to add a little bit of muscle tissue, what we call a lean bulk, the NPP. But here's like what I was focusing on, Steve. You have a choice of Decas. You have a choice of trends. You literally can run different things at different parts of the cycle. And something that I've been very, very clear on in other shows, and it's not, I'm not the first person to say, use this phrase, but you motherfuckers have never had it so good. When you come, and we're going to talk about Para Pharma briefly, you have a choice of products to run. You literally aren't
Yeah.
restricted in that particular
And
way.
in another
We
20
haven't.
years, they'll look back and say the same thing.
Oh yeah,
they'd be like, wow,
Steve, we
we,
haven't included growth
yeah,
hormone. We haven't talked about insulin. We haven't
yeah.
talked about some of the other things.
And that
There's
would be
growth
another good
hormone.
option
Yeah.
too. Adding growth hormone and insulin
Yes.
to these
Yes.
types of stacks would be good too. So why don't you talk about Mobster? What was your biggest weight? How much did you weigh at your biggest
Yeah.
kilograms and pounds? And what
Yeah. Yeah.
got you there before we move on to the Parapharma?
Right. So my absolute fucking biggest, which was a straight Sustanon Deca stack, I believe I was probably just still using Novadex at that point, Steve. I didn't have the knowledge to talk about AIs and use AIs, and I should have done. It was out there. Was stuff. There was at least one available. And I got to, that's actually ironically, Steve, when I came here, but I wasn't doing any shows with Steve, but I had some working knowledge. I got to 153 kilograms, which 150 kilos is 330 pounds. So free would be about 336. I would say 336, but I think it's closer to 338. So the biggest I've ever fucking been. It was a bit of a rebound because I'd done a cut for 4 weeks and then I did the bulk for 4 fucking weeks and just got the biggest I've ever done. I have run Sustain on the Decker together last year, or it might be nearly this year, as high as 1.6, 1,600 milligrams total. But I dropped that back this time around to where I know that I'm my strongest and bulkiest, and that's typically around the 850, as I said earlier on. Right now, and I weighed myself this morning. I weighed something else at the gym, but I also weighed myself. I'm 308 pounds as we do this show. So that's actually kind of the smallest I've been for a long time. I was sitting at 327 for
And
two
at your
years.
peak, what were your calories and protein per day?
Yeah, that's weird, Steve, because we actually discussed this very briefly on the forums the other day about how Mobster doesn't seem to need as high of amount of protein as some of the other guys. So I have run protein as high as 300 grams a day. That's ironically, when I was running a supplement company, I'm more likely to use food. I can put away when I'm in the mood a 32 ounce tomahawk steak, and that's got to be 200 fucking grams of protein right there. But I just don't feel like it. And I'm able to maintain a very healthy size and a healthy level of strength. Right now, a couple of lifts, I'm strong as I've ever fucking been, or very close to it. Hatfield squat is an example yesterday. It did a PB for reps yesterday. Lifetime PB for reps. So £846 for foot yesterday at 308. And here's the thing: I sit around the 200 grams of protein on a good day. I don't push it. I don't try to push it. I really kind of should, just to see if I would get bigger or stronger or have a better response. But I don't need to. I'm not. I'm 61. I'm kind of like, yeah, all right, whatever. Been there, seen there, done it. So it was nice to be 336 pounds, and I can eat a lot of protein, but I don't need to because I'm doing these shows with Steve. I'm not doing a physical job. I'm not out there pushing a broom or whatever, and I've done all that kind of stuff in the past. I eat. I think I average around 4,000 calories total over the day. I do get my steps in. I have pushed the food. When we were talking about bulking back on other shows, Steve and I both described the appetite stimulant that he touched upon earlier. And I absolutely have had 4 big meals a day. And I think at that time was also when I was doing the 300 grams of protein, Steve, I owned a protein slash supplement company. So I would eat or drink normal amount of food and then have 3 shakes a day. And that worked for me at that time. I much prefer now food for the macronutrients as much as anything else. I can still do the high protein drink thing, but I prefer food as I think it's better overall, Steve. And again, not trying to be my absolute biggest, not trying to add fucking muscular weight. If it happens, it's great, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm on the downside of needing to be even bigger or even stronger in that particular regard. The strength thing I like, don't need to be really, really big. And again, it's easy for me to say that when I'm over 300 pounds. It's easy for me to go, oh, I don't want to be too big with a
Yeah.
19 and a half,
Well,
20-inch coat arms or 52
if I
inch
take
chest.
you with me, to a fishing pier or to the game or
Yeah, yeah.
something, and someone wants to
What,
start trouble with me, I got you right there. You think they're going to start trouble with me? If we go to a football game and then
it
someone
does
wants,
work. It does work, Steve. I've done it. I told very quickly for the listeners, I told some of the story this morning.
I
My
mean, you fucking
last,
snap that. You ever seen that movie 28 years later, how the alpha rips the person's head off? That's pretty much what you would do
I've
to them.
yeah, I haven't watched that yet, but I've seen some of the storyline. I'm in that kind of place now, and maybe it's being big and strong and just or old and not giving a fuck. My last proper job pre-COVID, I would throw people off the premises, not physically, I didn't have to, but I'd essentially swear at them, get the fuck out of here. You're not supposed to swear. I can say what I fucking like. If I get the sack, I've got money, I've got a bench, I don't give a fuck. And it never got physical ever. No one ever put hands on. They never had to put hands on. They'd stand there looking stupid. I'd say, we're standing here, you're going to fuck off. And then they'd fuck off. So it's like, because my arms are sticking out of my shirt, I don't give a shit. I'm not fussed. I wasn't worried about losing my job. Just get the fuck out of here. Stop pissing me off. And then just go and put the kettle on and have a cup of tea, and my day was over. It was no big deal. And some of that is the whole being big and strong and confident in yourself. And some of it was being an old motherfucker with money in the bank who didn't give a fuck. But again, that's part of what we do. It's the journey through life, guys. It is what it is. So yeah, being big and strong. I can say that I don't need to be big, and I'm still over 300 fucking pounds. I am big. I am strong. Here is the end of it. And I still like to do some of the old school stacks because the old school stuff works. But for you, the listener, your options, your accessibility, the products that are available. I've never used growth, Steve. At my biggest, 336, 153 kilos, whatever the fuck it is. What if I'd have added insulin? What if I'd have had growth hormone? What if I'd have used more trend or trend full stop? Could I have been 340? Could I have been 345? Some of the guys on the forums suggested I could have got to 350. People out there like Dave Crossan, etc., have been close to 400 pounds. The late, I forget his fucking something name from Biohazard USA was something Smith. He was close to 400 pounds. How much fucking bigger and stronger could I have got if I'd have pushed it? So you guys, listen, you can do these things if you're set up for it. You can do these things and you can take it to a degree that I've never taken it to. Listen, come on the forums and check that stuff out as well. Para Pharma. Why do we talk about companies like Para Pharma on these shows? It's not complicated, guys. I say this, you know who my favorite brands are. One of those brands I've used and had immense success is Para Pharma. The company that supplied it to me got it to me within 5 fucking days. I've got some brands that I really love and work with. This is the quickest I've ever had a delivery. That's number one. Number two, accessibility of products. What do you want, Steve? What do you want, Mobster? This is what I got. And the products came, as I said, very, very quickly. Clean, clear, concise. If I want to check those products out, I can go, as I'm looking at right now as we do this show, the Para Pharma um, website, and there is a tab for lab tests. I can click on those lab tests. I can see up-to-date stuff. I can contact them and ask, and so on and so forth. And again, look, 45, 46 different products. I can check who is the supplier. They've got the companies that they work with that resell their products. I can click on the supplier check and see if the company that I'm dealing with is one of their sources, is one of their suppliers. If it's not, I contact them and say, is this company with you? Are they working to sell your products? Have they just joined the gang, so to speak? So I can do that. And here's the thing. And I was running, ironically, not a bulk with Para Pharma, but a cut. I've told this story. I recompositioned, and I went from 327 down to 320 back up to 327, but with a smaller waist, meaning I lost fat and added muscle. Now, when we're using products like Para Pharma, and I know Steve's going to say the same, we want effective products. We want to know that what we're doing, what we're using, the company that we chose is dosed correctly, is clean, is sterile, has been around a long time, and bottom line, fucking works. And I can absolutely say that the products that I had from Para Pharma did the job. Literally went down 2 notches on my weightlifting belt, had to adjust my belt at the time, and went back up to the starting point of size or weight on the scale, meaning I got leaner and I added muscle. And I only run that stack, Steve, for 4 fucking weeks. So, yeah. And then went into the bulk, which was the biggest I've ever been. So talk about your experience as Para Pharma as well.
Yeah, and what do you want from a brand? We talked about earlier how things were back in the 70s. Then we talked about how things were in the 90s. So you can extrapolate all that stuff when these forums started coming around in the late 90s, early 2000s. How many guys were ripping each other off, selling each other gear that they never even knew this gear was legitimate or not? Like they'd sell each other Anavar or Primo or Tren or Deca or Testosterone, whatever. We didn't know what it was. Nobody knew what it was at that time, but they were taking the risk of doing it because they had to take that risk. Now you could take gear and send it off to be professionally tested. I'm not talking about those stupid rip-off lab kit tests that
Yeah, they're
people are buying
rubbish.
online. You don't want to use those. I'm talking about legitimate.
Even the lab tests are cheaper than they used to be, Steve.
So
But
you send out the gear and it's a university lab setting. They
yep.
test it out. They tell you exactly what's in it. So you can do that for just about anything. There's people even now, I see YouTube channels are sending out water to be tested. They're sending out olive oil to be tested. It's all kind of things that you could do now. So it's not so easy anymore to rip people off. At least those of us like me or like you guys that listen to this podcast,
Mm.
you are the most informed, most educated, and smartest people out there because you know that we're going to give you the great information. So you seek the truth out there, right? That's the
Yeah.
difference. You seek the truth, you don't seek the bullshit. So you're going to want to be using high quality gear, and that's what Para Pharma gives you. Their gear is consistently sent out anonymously and vetted
Yep.
to make sure that it's legit. There's guys on the forum using their gear in their logs. So, and we're seeing the results that they're getting. We're seeing that they're improving, they're getting stronger, they're getting leaner, they're bulking, they're doing all this nice stuff that we all want to do.
Let me
So,
jump in and ask Steve you a question. So we talked about guys on other shows using their own money, the money from their own pocket to do this lab test, which was much easier than it's ever been. And I quote a line which you'll remember, Stephen. If it's something like the person in question had 10 products from 10 different approved sources that we talk about at Evolutionary, including Para Pharma, sent off for testing. I think roughly $100 a pop, so $1,000 of testing. But he had the money, he was ready for it, etc. And he said, and I quote, I thought we good sources, the guys, who knows, in his head, he thought 8 of the 10 products would pass within a few percent or whatever else, and 2 would fail. And the reality was, including Para Pharma, every single company passed. Para Pharma was fucking gold. Para Pharma, I think, was one product was 97, and a more recent test was actually slightly overdosed at 102%. Everything was fucking golden. And Para Pharma was one of those group of products that a random person using their own money tested, and it came back golden, guys. Absolutely fucking on spot. And again, don't take it from us. Go ahead and check. Come on the forums. Go on other fucking forums. Put Para Pharma into their search engines and see what comes up. You will see they are good to fucking go. Absolutely. As always, please note we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. And podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.